In this video, I'm gonna do the passive examination of the shoulder, and I'm starting on the right side with the flexion. So I'm just leading the arm forward up until the range of motion is full. And the range of motion is normally up to 180 degrees, so that's the norm, and my patient is definitely in the norm. And I'm doing this 3 times on each side, so I can compare the sides. And this movement is happening in the sagittal plane and in the transverse axis. The next movement I'm going to perform at my patient is the abduction. So I'm just grabbing the arm the same way as I did for the flexion, and leading it on the side of his body up until the range of motion is full. As you can maybe see, on the first time I did that, the shoulder had like a little bit of a pop, and so I limited the way I put it up, so I didn't push it as hard because it kept on popping, so the range of motion was a little bit limited. And this is happening in the frontal plane and the sagittal axis. So I'm doing it 3 times again. Next up, I'm going to do the horizontal adduction. Therefore, I'm leading his arm on the horizontal plane to the other side of his body as far as possible. And this can go up to 40%. And I would say my patient is definitely in the norm, but I didn't measure it. So yes. And this, as I said before, it happens in the transverse plane, so horizontal plane, and within the longitudinal axis. The next movement I'm performing on my patient is the shoulder extension. So I'm grabbing into his elbow and his arm is in a 90-degree angle, and my left arm here is on his right shoulder, and I'm pulling his arm backwards until the range of motion of the shoulder extension is full. It can go up to 40 degrees here, and this movement happens in the sagittal plane with the transverse axis. I'm doing it 3 times on each shoulder again. The next movement I'm going to perform is the external rotation. So the upper arm is in a 90-degree angle to his upper body, and I'm grabbing onto his wrist, and I am leading the lower arm up, also again in a 90-degree angle, and this can go up to around about 60 degrees, and I'm doing it on both sides 3 times again, and this is happening in the sagittal plane and the transverse axis. And there should be 2 90-degree angles here, and exactly, I'm doing the Rome again. And this time I'm doing the internal rotation, so it's the same positioning of my arms. I'm keeping the upper arm stable, and this time I'm pushing down the lower arm with grabbing onto the wrist. This is also happening in the same planes and axis, and I'm doing it also on the other side again, and this rotation can go up to 95 degrees. So in this video, I'm going to do the passive examination of the elbow. So I'm asking my patient to lay down on the table so I can access the flexion and extension first. So first of all, I'm going to do the flexion, and the flexion can go up to 150 degrees. So I'm holding onto the or the upper arm, and I'm pushing his forearm as far as possible in the direction of his shoulder, and I'm doing the extension right after, and therefore I'm grabbing his elbow with my one hand and pushing the lower arm as far down as possible. And this movement can go up to, it depends on the person, but minus 1 degree or up to minus 10 degrees. Exactly. And both of those movements are happening in the sagittal plane and the transverse axis. And I'm doing it 3 times on each side again. Here I'm doing the extension again, and this movement is way smaller than the flexion, for example. So the next movement is going to be the pronation, and I'm asking my patient to sit down so it's going to be easier for me. And I'm going to put a little bit of pressure against the upper arm, so we are only focusing on the elbow joint. And at first you can see the palm of the hand, and then rotating the palm inside, so the radius is crossing over the ulna. And here you can see the supination. It's the other way around, so you can see the dorsal side first, and I'm rotating so you can see the palm next. And both of those two movements are happening in the transverse plane within the longitudinal axis, and it's a rotation of the lower arm, and here again the radius is crossing over the ulna. Now I'm going to do the passive examination of the wrist, and I'm starting with the dorsal flexion and the palmar flexion. First off, for the dorsal flexion, I am grabbing into the palm of his hand and keeping the wrist stable and pushing his hand as far as up as possible, and this can go up to 70 degrees. And for the palmar flexion that is coming up next, I am just doing the opposite. So I'm grabbing onto the dorsal side of the hand and I'm pushing it as far down as possible. And this happens in the sagittal plane and the transverse axis. In this exercise, I'm going to do the ulnar and radial deviation. Starting off with the ulnar, I'm grabbing onto the wrist and the hand again, and I'm pulling it to the side of the ulnar, so to the side where the pinky is, as far as possible, and that can go up to 50 degrees. The radial deviation can go up to 20 degrees, and both takes place in the frontal plane and the sagittal axis. Now you can see the pronation of the wrist, therefore I'm grabbing onto the wrist and I'm rotating it inside, so you can see the dorsal side of the hand. And then I'm going to do the supination, and it's the other way around, so I'm rotating it outside, and I'm keeping the elbow stable by pushing against it with my body weight, and this is taking place in the transverse plane and the longitudinal axis.